Good evening, everyone. This is the Golden Gate Computer Society monthly general meeting. I'm Marcelino Nogueira, the current president, and we welcome you to our Zoom monthly meeting now. We used to have, as some of you would know, we used to have these, in person, but we've had to, change a few things, and here we are. I'd like to, oh, there Steve showed up. Thank you, Steve.
Hi there.
So I would like to, Ron, are you on? I'm not. Oh, there you are. You're with Shirley. Okay.
I am.
Ron, thanks for organizing our speaker, and I'm going to turn it over to you to say a couple of things and introduce our guests.
Well, Heinz did such a great job on the newsletter. That introduction of Jon. He's a PhD, he's an economist. He's talked to us before about the COVID-19 and economic effects. And so he's not new to the GGCS. And we might ask him to talk about autonomous vehicles at the CERS meeting because of this. Anyway, he's with an organization of economists and speaks on a variety of subjects, from immigration to federal debt. And he was graciously consented to do autonomous vehicles, which I'm kind of excited about. So Jon, if I left anything out, please feel free to add whatever you feel.
Okay, well, that was just fine. Thank you, Ron.
Welcome, Jim.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me back. I guess that means you must have enjoyed the talk on COVID. But anyways, yeah, I'm going to talk about autonomous vehicles, and this is probably my favorite talk of all the talks that Need gives. It always spurs the most conversation and speculation, and since it's futuristic, nobody can tell me that I'm wrong. So that is a joke, yes. All right, so autonomous vehicles, you guys know about Need. Need is a nonprofit that I started about 3 years ago. We've made great strides, especially during COVID. We've given 365 talks now to about 17,000 people on a wide variety of economic issues. We are nonpartisan. There won't be any specific policy recommendations here, but for a lot of talks, there are policy options, but no specific recommendations. We don't recommend any. We just merely talk about what the options are. To date, we are about 52 members of our honorary board, Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, and the likes, some Nobel Prize winners. I think we're up probably 40 or 50 members of the delegation since I last spoke to you, so that's exciting. We've got lots of new people coming on board on a regular basis. Here's where we are. We're all over the country. So if anybody has friends in some other state where they're members of a group that brings in speakers, would love to send somebody in to talk to them. And here is a list of the topics on which we are currently speaking. So if you'd like to have me or somebody else from Need back to talk on any of these, I'd be delighted to set that up. All right, but today we are going to talk about autonomous vehicles. This is a slide deck that I first started writing probably 4 or 5 years ago before I started Need. I just got kind of hooked on the notion of autonomous vehicles. It has gone through the review process that all Need slide decks do. One conservative subject matter expert and one liberal subject matter expert to maintain its nonpartisan nature. And what we're going to talk about where the autonomous vehicles path leads. We'll talk a little bit about the transition, some policy and planning issues, and then major economic and development changes. Because the changes that are going to come with autonomous vehicles are very, very significant and important. So we'll talk in some length about those. First, so what is the autonomous vehicles path, right? What's the projected onset of autonomous vehicles as a consumer item, and how fast will adoption happen? This is a forecast put together by McKinsey & Company, and it suggests that by around 2030, autonomous vehicles will come into play, and then maybe they'll have significant adoption by 2050. This is what a lot of forecasts look like, and I put it out there. And there's a little bit, you might sense a little something in my voice that I don't believe this forecast, and it's true, I don't. McKinsey and the big consulting firms have a tendency to be very conservative when it comes to projecting the adoption of new technologies. By way of example, and I apologize to anybody who might have worked at McKinsey or works at McKinsey, but you know, they've been known to get things wrong. In 1980, McKinsey was hired by AT&T to forecast cell phone penetration by the year 2000. And in 1980, McKinsey forecast that there would be about 900,000 cell phones in use by the year 2000. And they missed that by just a little bit. The real number was 109 million, so they missed it by a little bit over 100%. So they by a little over 100 million, I should say. So I think that this forecast is another one of those forecasts that's way too conservative, especially for regions like the Bay Area, where technology adoption tends to be pretty fast. Right, so that's the growth path McKinsey thinks, and I will tell you more about the growth path that I think is likely to happen. And on our way there are two important questions. One is, when will transportation as a service be available? As will become clear, I think that the best version of the world with autonomous vehicles is where transportation services are largely provided by a small number of providers. And I'll talk more about that. And second is, how quick is the transition going to be, right? So once transportation as a service is available, when is it going to be, by and large, ubiquitous? Right? So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this slide I keep in here as a little bit of a reminder, kind of to myself, about the hubris in this industry. So this is, put this together probably 4, maybe 5 years ago, and NVIDIA thought that they would have a level 4 enabling system, and level 4 then was fully autonomous. Now we've ditched the taxonomy that has level 4 being fully autonomous, and it's level 5, but they don't have that. Audi was going to introduce their first self-driving car by 2020. That's not on the market. Toyota, again, 2020. Elon Musk, fully autonomous by 2019 and approved by 2021. Well, I think it's just been recently that Tesla has put their beta of a fully autonomous vehicle out there. So it'll take a little time before that makes it onto the market. Volkswagen, they thought by 2019, and it didn't happen. I think a lot of this was rhetoric, more designed to generate venture capital investment and other financial investments. And I think it was hugely successful. The amount of money that has funneled into autonomous vehicles development is staggering. Despite all of these headlines that didn't come true, I think that we are still headed very rapidly to the adoption of autonomous vehicles. And I think that largely because there are, 40 plus major corporations, right? I had put together a slide that had images of all the 40 plus corporations on it, but that wasn't very effective. So here are just some of the major players. Apple is a major player, Waymo, GM, Lyft, Tesla, Uber are all major players. And then we've got companies like Cisco, Baidu, and lots of foreign companies. There is a veritable fire hose of money being thrown at the development of autonomous vehicles. Okay, so when do I think this is possible? I think honestly that by 2025, there's likely to be wide-scale autonomous vehicles available. And that there actually are pilot projects now. Google, Waymo, Google's autonomous vehicles company, has started a pilot project in Phoenix, where they have a bunch of fully autonomous, no driver in the vehicle, fully autonomous vehicles giving people rides. And it's not limiting the number of people, it's limiting the geography a little bit. But anybody who is in that geography can get in one of their cars and get used to the experience. So autonomous vehicles, they're here. I think that by 2025, they'll be ready for mass rollout, right? And if they're ready for mass rollout in 2025, my projection is that by 2035, about 95%, or the vast majority of all vehicle miles traveled, will be by autonomous vehicle. I think the last 5% may be difficult to achieve, and those will be sort of special purpose vehicles. When I think about that, I think about construction workers where they have a lot of tools that they need to keep in their own car, and that they may be slow to shift over to autonomous vehicles. All right, so it begs the question, wow, that's really aggressive. Is it possible? And I sort of back that up by saying, well, look at the adoption of cars. I saw a presentation, this was probably 5-6 years ago. A guy put up a picture of Broadway in New York in 1910. And there were about 99 horses for every car. And then by 1920, there were about 99 cars for every horse. It had completely reversed itself just in a matter of 10 years. Now, to be fair, there was a law that went into effect that said you had to clean up after your horse, and that might have hastened the transition a little bit. But still, the transition happened in 10 years. And this was a situation where you had to buy something to make the transition. And I'll make the case with autonomous vehicles, you have to sell something to make the transition, but we'll talk more about that later. Right. Second, we were talking about electric vehicles earlier, but the adoption of electric vehicles has been very slow, a lot of people say. Right. Well, with electric vehicles, again, you have to spend more money. You have to buy a car that's more expensive than an internal combustion engine vehicle. And so that has slowed down the transition. There's also been an enormous amount of resistance by the car companies for the switch to electric vehicles. So I think that has slowed things down as well. Right. So I think the adoption of autonomous vehicles, once they're available, readily available in transportation as a service form, we're going to see a very rapid transition. And I'll talk more about that, why that is. I think for individuals, there is what I call an adoption dividend, right? Rather than having to pay more for an electric vehicle. Right. I also think that because if you look at this graph and this graph, I'm going to have to work on this graph because there's just too much going on. But it's the rate of technology adoption in U.S. households from 1903 to 2019. Right over here is 1903 and technologies that are adopted. And you can see that there is, for a lot of them, kind of a slow pace of adoption. Let's move over here to 2009, 2010, right? The pace of adoption of new technologies is extremely rapid, right? And again, these are all technologies where you have to pay money, right? Adopting autonomous vehicles as a service, you get paid money, right? So it's going to be even faster, perhaps, than a lot of these technologies. And I think that if we here's a forecast that was put together by a group called Rethink X, and they largely mirror my own thinking on autonomous vehicles. This was put together a little bit early, and so their forecast is a little bit optimistic. And the real question is, what year is this going to be, right? So on this graph, the blue part of the bars, the bars are annual vehicle miles traveled. And the blue part, those are vehicle miles traveled in privately owned vehicles, right? In internal combustion privately owned vehicles. Human-driven privately owned vehicles. And the orange part, that is the share of vehicle miles traveled that is autonomously transportation as a service, right? And there are two notable things about this forecast. One is that when autonomous vehicles are available, vehicle miles traveled start to increase rapidly. And that's because the price of travel in a car is going to go down. The other thing is that the share of vehicle miles traveled that are in transportation as a service is going to rise considerably up to the point where, as I mentioned before, about 95% of all vehicle miles traveled. This year is 2030. I would replace that with 2035, where about 95% of all vehicle miles traveled are going to be autonomous in transportation as a service, right? So we get more vehicle miles traveled and we get a pretty rapid transition. Right. So that's my belief about what the future, how it's going to unfold for autonomous vehicles. I think this number is 2025, and I think this number is 2035 or 2034. All right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what the future is going to look like with transportation as a service and autonomous vehicles. Well, it's going to look like this. The cars are going to look a little bit different. Maybe they're going to be configured internally a little bit different. They're going to have sensors all over the place. But as an economist, I don't really care about this. This isn't what interests me or what matters. What interests me and what matters is whether we end up in heaven or hell. These are two vastly different equilibria for autonomous vehicles. One is obviously meant to be good, heaven, and the other less good, hell. Let me go through each of them. I'll start off with hell and show you and talk to you about why I think it's hell. Hell is where we don't have transportation as a service, right? It's going to be primarily individual private car ownership, much as it is today. And because there isn't the impetus that there is in heaven for switching to electric vehicles, they're still largely going to be internal combustion engines, right? Why does this make it hell? It makes it hell because there's going to be dramatically increased vehicle miles traveled. And because they're internal combustion engines, that's going to be a dramatic increase in the amount of pollution. Right? There's also, because of the dramatic increase in vehicle miles traveled, likely to be an increase in congestion, significant increases, right? And these cars are still going to have to be parked, right? Because as with most vehicles today, they're only going to be in use about 5 to 10% of the time, and then they got to be parked. Right? It's different than the heaven version, right? But let me give you an example of why we're going to get dramatically increased vehicle miles traveled, likely increased congestion, and they still have to park. Right, so let's take the case of 2 adults and a child. This is a 3-person family. This is what an example of what might happen in the morning. Right, in the morning, they all start out at home, and the car, because it doesn't have to be parked nearby, and as I'll talk about later, there's reason to get rid of the garage. Well, we're going to park the car off somewhere where land is cheap, maybe in a big parking structure. Right, so the first thing that has to happen in the morning is that the car goes from the parking structure to the house. And it does that with it yielding or generating what are called 0 passenger miles, right? Vehicle miles traveled, but 0 passengers in the car. Right. The next thing that happens maybe is that the first adult heads off to work. So their vehicle takes that adult to work. Then the vehicle goes back home, and then it takes the child to school, right? And then it goes back home. And then it collects the second adult, and it takes that adult to the office, and then who knows, but maybe goes back to the parking structure, right? So this is about 7 trips that the car is going to have to make, where in principle it could be making, say, just 2, right? So perhaps the first adult goes to the first office by public transportation. The second adult takes the first trip in the car, taking the child to school, and then goes from school to the office, right? So just 2 trips instead of 7. Right, and there are a ton of 0 passenger miles in here. 1, 3, 5, and 7 are all 0 passenger mile trips, and we don't know who knows how long they are, but that's at least twice as many miles as the car is traveling to actually take people someplace. Right, and that's just in the morning. Right, rinse and repeat for the evening. So dramatically increased vehicle miles traveled, and a lot of cars out there driving around with nobody in them. Right, not being productive. Right. All right. So let's talk then about heaven. Heaven is a situation where vehicle ownership is very limited. Private ownership is largely relegated to those with specialized vehicle needs. Again, think construction worker, or perhaps handicapped with a wheelchair. But I think that Uber, Google, Lyft, GM will figure a way to make money from those folks as well. Fleet ownership will serve everybody else. Right, transportation as a service, Uber, Google, Lyft, Apple, GM, Ford, who knows? The engines will largely be electric, because if I have a car, I would much rather it be electric, because electric cars, as you may have learned from a previous speaker, have about 19 electric engines have about 19 moving parts instead of the 1900 moving parts from an internal combustion engine. So they break down less. They spend less time in the shop. Insurance, largely product liability, because the only entity that controls how the vehicle gets from A to B and whether or not it hits something on the way is going to be the company that designed and produced the vehicle, right? Us, the consumer driving in it, we don't have any influence over how it gets from A to B. We just determine what A and B are. Right, so not clear when we're going to get there, but I like to think at any rate that this is the likely model. And every time that I talk to policymakers and transportation specialists, I try to convince them that this really should be the model that gets encouraged. And I think it's even possible that for many regions, say the Bay Area, adoption is going to happen pretty fast. So within 10 years, we could see a massive transformation of the way that we all get around. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about why it's heaven. And it's heaven because the cars are not only autonomous, but they're shared. Right, and I mentioned earlier how vehicles today are used about 5% of the time. So we have enormous excess capacity. right? So with autonomous transportation as a service, we'll have much less excess capacity. They'll be connected, which means that they talk to each other. And as with people, cars that talk to each other are much less likely to hit each other. And they're going to be electric, so they're going to be green, right? So there are many upsides to the heaven version over the hell version, right? Fewer cars in existence, what I mentioned, much more efficient use of the vehicles that are in existence. There are studies that suggest that we could do away with about 60% of the cars that are in existence. So we could replicate all of the vehicle miles traveled today with just 40% of the cars, right? So that's going to take up a lot less steel, a lot less rubber, a lot less aluminum, vinyl, leather, plastic, what have you, right? So better use of resources. Right. Vehicle miles traveled could go up or down in the heaven version. They'll probably go up because, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to get cheaper to go places. But each mile is on average going to be more productive in hell. And again, by more productive, I mean you're actually going to be people in the car, right? Far fewer zero passenger miles, right? Congestion effects are unclear, but likely reduced. And I was really sold on this notion it's going to be reduced by a traffic study that looked at 880 going by Fremont, right? So 880 going by Fremont, it's currently 4 lanes in each direction. And they asked the question, by how many lanes would we have to increase capacity? By how many lanes would we have to increase the width of the highway in order to replicate the congestion savings or the speed increases that will come about by autonomous vehicles? Right? It turns out that we can either increase throughput by autonomous vehicles or by widening the highway to 16 lanes from 4 in each direction. Right? It takes 16 lanes to reduce congestion the same amount that autonomous vehicles would. Right, and we'll talk more about why the congestion will be so reduced with autonomous vehicles, but just to think about right now, how often are you driving down the road and you see a brake light 3 lanes over, 10 cars up, and then there's this cascade of brake lights that comes back to you because everybody sees that brake light and starts to slow down. Well, autonomous vehicles aren't going to do that kind of thing. It also is an established research finding that accidents account for about 25% of all congestion. And if we can eliminate virtually, or if not entirely, accidents, then we can increase throughput by 25% in principle, right? So I think congestion effects are going to be significantly reduced. Then there's the right sizing of vehicles, right? We'll have individuals going down the highway in cars meant for 1 instead of cars meant for 8, right? So that will increase throughput. I think congestion is going to go down, and then there's minimal need for parking. I'm going to mention parking a couple of times and not really talk about it until close to the end. All right. So I mentioned that there is an adoption dividend. That adoption dividend comes about because if you use transportation as a service, and if it's readily available and it comes quickly, then you don't have to own a car. It turns out that AAA estimates that for the average individual owning a car, it costs almost $10,000 a year, $9,282. I think that's for 2019. And if you don't have to own a car, then you're not spending that $10,000 every year, right? The cost per mile will fall with transportation as a service from 59 cents today down to 19 cents. Right? And you can repurpose your garage. I mentioned this earlier. But right now, a lot of people in California don't use their garage as a garage, but we don't repurpose it because if we sell the house, then the next person who buys the house is probably going to want a garage. So we want to keep the garage there. But with autonomous vehicles, the next person buying your garage isn't necessarily going to want a garage. So maybe you transition it to another bedroom, to a playroom for your kids, to a rec room, to a den, what have you. Well, on average, that's going to increase the value of your house by about $50,000. If you happen to live in San Mateo County, then that's going to increase the value of your house by about $200,000, right? So there's savings in terms of owning a car, right? And you're not going to have to spend that $10,000 on transportation as a service. You're likely to have to spend about $2,000 replicating the vehicle miles that you do in your car now. And time recovery, right? 50% of San Francisco Bay Area labor force has a commute in excess of 30 minutes. Right, so that's an hour every day, right? They'll get that back if you switch to transportation as a service. Now, this is my attempt at humor. That's going to be a little bit of a pain to drive around all of those autonomous vehicles that are obeying the law, right? anyways, we'll let that go. All right. So what about the incentive to transition from a public perspective? Well, from a public perspective, we talk about the economic or social costs associated with human drivers, right? Now, I was talking earlier about, as we were speaking casually, about how, people are just not very good drivers. And I'm forever amazed that there aren't more accidents than there are, but there's still quite a few. And it turns out that accidents are the primary source of the social costs associated with human drivers. As I mentioned, drives about 25% of congestion, results in nearly 40,000 deaths every year. Last year was a little bit less. Add into that 2 million injuries, right? That feeds a lot of emergency rooms. And about 90+%, it's estimated that 90+% of all accidents are caused by human error, right? As opposed to mechanical failure, right? You add all of that up, and the costs of human drivers are between $800 billion and $1.3 trillion every year, right? So if we had autonomous vehicles, then we could add $1.3 trillion to the social welfare in the United States, right? How do we do that? Well, where does it come from? It comes from these sources. The two major sources are accident avoidance that generates benefits of about $500 billion, and the productivity associated with being in your car. That adds about another $500 billion, right? And then there's the fuel savings. There's the productivity you gain from the reduction in congestion, and fuel savings because of reduced congestion, right? So, and all that adds up to about $1.3 trillion. There are massive policy and planning issues, right? I think that government buy-in is essential. And I'll argue in a minute that governments really should be encouraging progress. Just think about that $1.3 trillion. That's low-hanging fruit out there. The sooner autonomous vehicles come into play, the sooner we can get that. But it's going to be really difficult because a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. More than 10 million jobs that we see today are going to be gone. Important transitional issues. Right? What infrastructure should be developed? Right? Because a lot of stuff that we might build today will be obsolete with autonomous vehicles. My favorite example of that is the smart train, the Sonoma Marin area rapid transit. Once we have autonomous vehicles, nobody is going to be riding the smart train. And if that's 10 years away, well, I'll get off my soapbox about smart train. What to do about public transportation, and this is aside from smart train, public transportation may well experience reduced demand. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, what do we do with all the parking spaces? This is one of the better problems associated with autonomous vehicles. We can create more green space, perhaps, right? So from a planning perspective, right, the time horizon for any investment in infrastructure to generate a return is going to be much shorter. Right, we're going to need fewer vehicle lane miles, right? We're going to need less road. We're going to need more maintenance, right? So hopefully we can transition a lot of our spending from expansion to maintenance, fewer potholes, right? And we need to encourage the changes to happen more quickly for these 4 reasons that are on the next slide. So I'll just go to the next slide, right? We need to encourage change from mobility and equity standpoint, right? Think about elderly who can't drive anymore, disabled who struggle, and the impoverished, right? The impoverished and the equity issue here is because most public transportation goes from residential to commercial, right? And a lot of low-wage workers, those who are living in poverty, their commutes are very often residential to residential, which means that they have to have a car. They're likely to have a cheap car that breaks down a lot, which is going to cause them to lose jobs more often than they otherwise might. So if we have transportation as a service at 19 cents per mile, that's going to be a lot cheaper for those folks than buying their own used car. From a safety perspective, I've already talked about the reduction in deaths that are likely to occur. Productivity, right? From reduced congestion, you can now, on your way home from work, you can have a glass of wine. On your way to work, you can make calls and get your day started, right? So massive productivity improver. And let's talk a little bit about the environmental reasons for shifting, right? So from an environmental perspective, right, here is a depiction of implications of parking, right? There are parking events. When a car parks, other cars have to slow down. And it's also estimated that when there's urban congestion, about 25% of the vehicles in that congestion are searching for parking, right? So if nobody has to search for parking, then that's going to be a dramatic reducer of urban congestion, and that's good for the environment. Think about obligations when you build an apartment complex. Many localities now mandate that you have to build parking in as well, right? With transportation as a service, you don't have to, right? In many places, here's a 2-bedroom apartment and you got with a parking space, that's going to be about half again as much space required for parking. Let me ask the question, what's next to every church and synagogue in the nation, right? Well, a big parking lot, big, highly underutilized parking lot. And if we could think about maybe using about 1/5 of that space for pickup and drop off with transportation as a service, right? Then we could be putting down a lot less asphalt. That's better for the environment. If you think about surface parking, I'm sure all of us can envision a lot of this in San Francisco. If we could take those surface triangles and change them from parking to green space, right? That would be better for the culture and health of the general neighborhood as well as for the environment. So all of those things are possible improvements for the environment, right? Other massive changes that are going to come, disposable income, I've alluded to this, right? Because you don't have to spend $9,200 a year on your car, and you only have to spend $2,000 replicating those miles traveled with transportation as a service. Your disposable income is going to go up by about $7,000. And that's really good for the economy. That'll create jobs. Government finances are going to be thrown for a loop. There are no more DUIs. There's no more parking revenue, no more speeding ticket revenue. So the revenues are going to have to come from a different place. Transportation demand, we've already talked about vehicle miles traveled. I think they're going to go up. Infrastructure, we've talked about that. What infrastructure do we build? Public transportation, I'll say a little bit more about public transportation, employment, parking, and housing on the next slides. Right, so public transportation, I worry about public transportation. I'm a big fan of it. I confess I don't use it very much, but I office out of my house. The implications for public transportation are ambiguous, right? Transportation as a service will solve the first and the last mile problem, right? The first mile problem is, in order to get people to use public transportation, you have to get them from their home to the station. And then the last mile problem is getting them from the station to their office, right? Well, you could imagine calling an Uber or a Lyft that's autonomous and cheap. But then that begs the question, if you're going to get into the autonomous vehicle anyway, why not? And it's cheap, why not just take it all the way to your destination? Right. And so that's going to depend on how long your trip is on public transportation. So I think that autonomous vehicles are going to knock out an awful lot of short haul public transportation, leaving maybe only long haul or trains as public transportation. Right. So I think demand will probably shrink for short haul public transportation, increase for long haul. And extensions, there are already municipalities, I know of one in Florida, that extended their bus line, not by buying more buses and adding more stops, but they contracted with Uber or Lyft to provide dedicated services on one end of the bus line. And that dedicated service simply went from point A to point B and back again, extending the bus system. Okay, so from the perspective of employment, and this is really a big deal, it permeates throughout many sectors of the economy. The first order effects are of course going to be on drivers of all varieties, truck, taxi, delivery, what have you. Car production jobs, again, because we're only going to have 40% the number of cars. There are going to be far fewer people making cars, far fewer people making car parts. Gas stations, vehicle repair and body shops, all a thing of the past. Police and fire, far fewer accidents, so that reduces demand for police and fire. Don't have to police speeding. We don't have to police DUIs. Reduction in police forces. Healthcare workers, right? Those 2 million accidents that go to the emergency room, they don't have to anymore, right? So we need fewer people working emergency rooms. We could go on, and it's estimated that the cumulative number is going to be more than 10+ million jobs that, if we look out in the economy we see today, 10 years from now may well not be in existence. A lot of people will lose their jobs, but it is a 10-year transition. So maybe we can just phase a lot of those out with retirements. We'll see. All right. And then parking. Parking is kind of fun. Going to be greatly reduced demand for parking lots because people, parking lots at shopping malls and where have you, people will get out of the car and the car will go away. It doesn't have to park. Service providers like Uber, Google, Lyft, right? They'll have their own parking lots in strategic places where the cost of land is low, or maybe in urban areas because they'll have a lot of cars out on the road during commutes, but there'll be downtime in the middle of the day, and maybe it'll be cheaper to have a parking garage in an urban setting rather than to have the car drive out to where land is cheap. Right? Street parking will largely be a thing of the past. Again, more green space. Shopping mall parking, we can convert that to more shopping mall, although in the wake of COVID that seems highly unlikely. Or we could transition to more housing. And there are already good examples of shopping malls that have done this, right? Apartment complexes can convert parking, right? And use more of that space for creating more apartments, alleviating the housing problem that I'm sure all of us are acutely aware of in the Bay Area. To give you an idea of just how much space this all adds up to, right? It turns out that in Los Angeles, 14% of the incorporated land area is dedicated to parking. That's 200 square miles in the city of Los Angeles. In San Francisco, there are more than 250,000 on-street parking spaces, and that adds up to enough cars to parallel park a line 900 miles long, and California's entire coastline is 840 miles long. So you can take all of those on-street parking spaces and it's 60 miles longer than our coastline. That's enough cars to cover the Presidio, Golden Gate Park, and Lake Merced. Right, so nationwide, it's estimated there are 500 million spaces. That's enough to cover Delaware and Rhode Island combined. There are estimates that there are actually as many as 2 billion, parking spaces nationwide. So you can cover up Connecticut and Vermont too. Right, so that's an enormous amount of space that's dedicated to parking that we won't have to anymore. It can be useful, productive space now, if only green, which is very environmentally productive. Right, housing. Housing is going to be suddenly easier to build, right? At least in Marin, anytime anybody says, I want to build some housing, everybody else stands up and says, oh, congestion, I don't want it. Well, if congestion is significantly reduced by autonomous vehicles, maybe we get more housing built. It's also the case that homes, because of garage conversions, are going to be able to accommodate more people. 2 bedrooms become 3, 3 become 4, 4 become 5, and we have miraculously more housing. So that will alleviate some of the housing issues. Just to sum up, all right, we're going to have massive employment upheaval. This is the big deal, and this is the thing that will, from government's perspective, perhaps retard the adoption of autonomous vehicles, which would be really unfortunate, but I get it. Local government finances are going to look very different. Housing, hopefully easier to build, especially in places like the Bay Area. Parking conversions are going to be commonplace. A lot of parking, as we know it, will go away. Demand for transportation infrastructure will likely decline. Transportation infrastructure technology is going to be a booming business. And demand for public transportation may well also decline. Okay. Just a couple of final words on the environmental implications, right? Remember, there's going to be improved resource utilization. We're going to have more efficient travel. We'll have single people in cars fit for single people instead of for 8 people. Optimized routes. You know these autonomous vehicles are going to be constantly trying to figure out the best route and be well connected to do so. Reduced congestion. No searching for parking. That's good for the environment. Increased VMT. That might not be so good for the environment, but it might still be okay with electric vehicles. Going to be cleaner technologies. They'll be lighter, not only because they don't hit each other, so we don't need them as structurally reinforced as they currently are. At the same time, the energy use of onboard electronics is likely to be significant and it's going to be heavy. To what extent does that offset the lightness of the structure? And the thing that I really worry about is increased urban sprawl. All right, we're going to have more people living out in the suburbs and commuting into their office in the urbs. Right. Okay, so that's what I have about autonomous vehicles. Happy to stop sharing now and take any questions you might have. A little daunted by the questions that this group might have, but let's go. And I will send these slides to Ron, who hopefully will circulate them to all of the rest of you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Jon. That was excellent, and I'm like speechless. One thing that comes to mind, though, is during the transition, you're going to have drivers and, competing with the autonomous vehicles. What do you think? How is that going to unfold?
Yeah, so it could be a little bit messy, but I think that Waymo's experience in Phoenix is that it's not that big a deal. The autonomous vehicles just do what they're supposed to, and they kind of mix in with the flow reasonably easily. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have been much less sanguine about it than I am now. But I think that we're going to see a gradual transition where the autonomous vehicles pretty smoothly kind of push out the human-driven vehicles.
And what kind of infrastructure, with regards to roads and the vehicles being able to, maneuver the different roads? Because, vision, humans can see all sorts of things going on. Well, if they're paying attention, that is, as opposed to, the vision that a computer has, which may be limited.
Right. So my understanding is that they're developing autonomous vehicles to work on the roads as they are now. Right. Which means that any technology that is infused into the roads will increase the efficiency with which the autonomous vehicles function. Right. I mean, you could in principle imagine a world where we have no stop signs, no stoplights, and the cars all by communicating with each other just navigate that. Through technology.
But that means you eliminate any human drivers at that point.
Correct. Yeah.
Russ, I think you had a question.
I got a couple of questions. One, how are you going to pay for this if you've eliminated all these jobs? How is anybody going to have any money to go and pay for it? Or is it going to be all government subsidized? And it still goes back to the fact of how are you going to do it? The second question is, how about the housewife who wants to go shopping and wants to go to go to Trader Joe's and shop for Trader Joe's, and she's doing that. Then she goes on from Trader Joe's, she goes to Safeway. Now, in between these things, where does she do with the goods that she's purchased?
Perfect. That's my question. What about your stuff? If
Okay,
I go to
stuff.
work, maybe I want to play golf afterwards. We have tons of stuff in our car.
Yeah.
You're not
Okay.
going to have one thing in your car.
Well,
Let me finish with my question.
Yeah, sorry, Russ.
You've got the situation to where you're going to several places, and what are you going to do with all this stuff? How are you going to pick up everybody in different places and everything? It just doesn't seem reasonable that you're going to do away with the individual vehicle. I can't see that happening.
Well, so here's a potential solution, right? So this is what I came up with, and there are surely much smarter people working much harder on these problems than I am. But imagine on your smartphone, there's an app that you use to call the autonomous vehicle. And it's the same way if you go and book an airplane ticket now, you can book a ticket that's got multiple legs. Right. So you could book your autonomous vehicle. I'm going to have multiple legs. I'm first going to go to Trader Joe's, then I'm going to go to United, and then I'm going to go to Whole Foods because I get different things at those different stores. And I want you to be my vehicle for all those trips. Right. And then the car maybe parks somewhere nearby, or maybe it drives around and generates 0 passenger miles. But that seems to me is a quick and dirty solution. The same with the golfing at the end of the day. Right. You may go to do 4 different trips and then go to the golf course and pull your golf clubs out. Reserve that car for the next 3 hours while you're out on the links.
But
if you
that car is going to sit with my golf clubs in it for 8 hours when I'm at work. I mean,
No.
you don't take stuff in your car like the rest of us do.
You would be surprised. I had golf clubs in my car the better part of yesterday.
Okay, so during my 8 hours at work, my stuff is in that autonomous car.
Well, so 2 things.
Then no one else is using it.
I agree there are issues, but perhaps you then reserve that car for the whole 8 hours and it parks in one of those urban structures that I mentioned. Right, you're going to pay for that, but still you're going to end up paying less than I'm sure in the Bay Area, the average cost of owning a car is much higher than $9,300 a year, right? So you'll still save money, even if that car is dedicated to you. Imagine a trip up to Lake Tahoe in the wintertime to go skiing, or you've got all your skis and all of your gear, right? You're not going to haul that out of your hotel and then put it in another car the next day. You're going to tell Uber, Google, Lyft, GM, this is my car for the week.
But you forgot my first question.
I have not forgot it. I haven't gotten there yet, Russ.
What are you going to do? Where do I get the money to pay for this stuff if I lost my job?
Yeah, well, so that's going to be a problem. People are going to lose their jobs. Other people will gain jobs, right? Remember the $7,000 a year that every household has in additional disposable income. That's going to create jobs. There are also going to be a lot of jobs created by the autonomous vehicle companies, right? We need somebody to clean these buggers. We need somebody to repair them when they do break down. So it will create jobs. Economists are always much better at pointing out the jobs that are going to go away than the jobs that are going to come in. But at the end of the day, it always happens that new jobs do appear. It always happens. We can't identify what they are because we don't really have crystal ball. But I agree with you that the transition may be difficult. But remember, it is only 10 million out of the 140 million jobs that are out there.
Ron, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. John, I have a Chevy Volt that has a lot of the stay in the same lane features. Nice. It has a lot of alarms to tell me when there's cars on the left and right. There's sensors all over the place. My concern is that knowing software and development, for example, Microsoft, how are they going to make sure that when there is an update or an upgrade, that it's not going to cause some other problem that they didn't anticipate? That's number one. And two, my car now, when it comes to one of those places where you can swerve into a different lane, you can move it. I mean, they compress the lane and your car is supposed to follow through. In both cases, my Volt got confused. And that's the reason I bring up the software, because also when you go down from north on 101 and get off at Central San Rafael, there's almost a 90-degree turn. My car signals collision thing because it sees the car that's turned right and thinks I'm going to go right into it, or it's a parked car. But I'm not going there. I'm turning before that. Yeah. So I'm concerned about the level of accuracy of the sensors, the technology, and how it's all going to be updated, and it's very, very new.
I would like to augment that question a second, because we have cell phone companies which want to give you 2 years of updates and then buy a new cell phone. Would that model happen here?
Well, so no, we're not going to own cars, right? You, Steve, and Ron, you guys won't own cars. It'll be Uber, Google, and Lyft that own all the cars. So I'm not going to care how often they have to buy a new car or upgrade their software. I'm going to care that they upgrade it when an upgrade's available. And Ron, to your observation about Microsoft, I'm sure we all remember back in the day the joke that was circulated. Suppose Microsoft built your car. You'd stop periodically to reboot your car, and it would be fine with you. Well, the reason Microsoft software is so crappy, and I'm reasonably certain there are some people who agree with me here about that, is that nobody dies, right? Because their software is crappy, right? And that's why I think insurance has to be product liability, right? The folks writing the software, the folks building the cars, they have to be really sure that that car is going to work.
Well, Uber had that. They killed a person.
Sure.
Arizona, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, Uber had disabled safety features in that car, and the person who was supposed to be watching was not. Right. So there were multiple levels of error in that accident, and I'm not saying that if we all went autonomous today, I think it would be a train wreck. Right. It's probably not there, but I'm reasonably confident that it will get there.
How do you envision how many autonomous suppliers there's going to be?
Well,
like Uber, Lyft, how many you're talking about? 1, 2, a dozen?
Well, so I think that there will be companies like Uber, Lyft, Google, GM that are universal nationwide. And then there will be a bunch of other, startups and wannabes in various geographies. And when I think about the likely version is that, the nationwide companies, if left to their own devices, then transportation could get very expensive. But barriers to entry are really not all that high. So I'm hopeful that there will be, all of these little wannabes that keep competition healthy in local areas. But I don't have a good answer to that, and I've never seen anybody sort of come out with, the optimal number of transportation as a service or two.
Your comments about jobs.
Yep.
I don't think that rings true for what's going on today in Middle America, where the industrial people are all looking for work. They're in a bad way.
Yep.
We're in the bubble here in California.
Yeah,
it's not the same across the country.
David, I agree with you 100%. And so whenever I talk to policymakers, which isn't as often as I would like, I stress to them that we should be starting right now, right? Devoting a ton of money right now to job training programs, right? And we need to better understand what job training programs have worked and are effective, and funnel just a ton of money, right? That's something that we should be doing regardless of autonomous vehicles. But with autonomous vehicles, the need for that kind of an effort is going to be it's going to be increased really dramatically, right? So I agree with you. I mean, we already have the job transition issue. We should be devoting a lot more energy and effort to shortening and easing job transitions for people whose jobs just flat out are going to become obsolete in the next 10 to 15 years.
Jon,
So we have a question from
can you
James.
talk about the different players?
Steve, hang on. James had his hand raised, and I'm turning it over to James.
Well, thanks, Jon. A very interesting presentation. I appreciated it. I got a couple of comments real quick. One, Russ, your comment about, specifically about Russ's comment about people losing jobs. There's kind of a classic example in economics, academia about, it's kind of a cliche about, and it has to do with that transition you mentioned in from 1910 to 1920, the complete switch between the use of horses and automobiles. And, well, what about the guys who make the buggy whips? I mean, they've both lost their businesses and their jobs and their source of income. There has never been a major technological revolution and adoption that hasn't involved some old ways of doing things that become completely obsolete and become market obsolete, but then are ultimately replaced by other things that are, as you well mentioned, are hard to foresee. So the short answer, I think, to Russ's question is, yeah, that'll happen, but there'll be offsetting things. That's what history, economic history, I think, tells us. Also, now you used the phrase transportation as a service, TAAS, and that AAS suffix on acronyms has become popular in the last decade or so.
Yep.
It seems to me like that's actually something that already exists. Uber and Lyft, almost by definition, are transportation as a service. And even if you relax how tightly you define it, I mean, anything that's public transportation is almost by definition transportation as a service. I don't own the bus. I pay a nickel to get on, or use my Clipper card or whatever to get on the bus, and I ride it till I get off. And then the third question, this is really more of a question, is you touched on the subject of insurance moving from something that I carry as myself personally to insure me against my liability for making an error as a driver, to insurance being something that the TAAS providers have to carry in order to, as product liability insurance. It seems to me like it also would still be a good idea for me to carry my own personal rider policy, in the same way I carry uninsured motorist coverage right now, because I don't expect something bad to happen, but if it does, I want to make sure I can be compensated and taken care of. And so, do you envision that might be something that comes along, a growing business of personal rider policy insurance, a market of some sort like that, to go along with the rise and the adoption of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah. So first on the economic transitions, absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better myself. Right. We've had lots of major transformations, and we always find jobs. Now, the quality of the new jobs is sometimes suspect, and that's a matter of.
And that's short term. That's always short term.
Right.
In the long run, it becomes a completely different world, and it works differently, and the job market per se grows and changes to match that.
Yep. And transportation as a service, I should be clearer and mention that I mean it specifically in the autonomous vehicle sphere.
Right. I assumed that, but I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on your usage of the term.
Yep. Thanks. I appreciate that. And as for having personal rider insurance, it depends on ultimately how safe these cars are. Right. If, as Ron pointed out, they're pretty glitchy, then yeah, you probably want that.
If they're glitchy, I'm probably not going to want to use them, but I'm going to want to keep my 2002 Honda Accord.
That's exactly the thing. Right? These companies know that if these cars don't work well, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get the transition. And there is so much money there to be had by selling these autonomous vehicle transportation as a services. That they're going to get it right. Waymo has been working so hard, right, to get it just right, because they know it's going to be easy to really mess it up.
And there's a clear and obvious parallel with air transportation too, because in the early days of that, planes crashed a lot, but it wasn't very long before they started getting pretty good at providing long-range transportation service without crashing.
Yep.
And it's not the case that planes never crash. It's the case these days that it's so rare that you don't hear the news story that says 30,000 commercial jet aircraft took off and landed safely today without incident. But that's what happens.
Yep. Thanks for the example. I'll use that in future talks.
Steve, go ahead. You're next. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Could you talk about the different players in this evolution? We have the manufacturers. You've got the users, which would probably be more like a Lyft or Uber, perhaps. You also have the Waymos. Do they adopt your model, or are they looking for a competitive advantage and the lack of interoperability?
So my impression is that, right. So there are the automobile producers. That's going to be the GMs. I don't know if it's going to be the Googles, but it's going to be probably the car companies that are in existence today. And then they'll join up with Waymo. They'll join up with Cruise as GM. Pardon me?
They already have. I mean, the different consortiums. Sure. I don't know what the consortium's network is like, whether Waymo's at the core of all of them or there are other Waymos, but it looks like there's a search for a competitive advantage, and no one's talking about interoperability. If I want to turn left, how do I tell all the other cars I'm turning left besides flashing a light?
Yeah, so
are there going to be standards?
Sorry, John?
Are there going to be standards basically set by the government, or what?
That was my question too. Especially, how the data processing industry emerged to end up with all the electrical engineering. Is my radar fast enough to detect your specific brand, or is there a standard being developed that says this is what we're going to do, this is how your car has to work autonomously?
Yeah, so the answer is I don't know, but my iPhone works pretty seamlessly with Samsung phones. I can call anybody with Samsung phone. And
how long does that take, though?
Pardon me? Oh, well, it's, right. So the cars aren't going to be dialing other numbers. They're going to be perpetually putting information out there and trying to glean information from the other vehicles. So, John, I think there will likely have to be some sort of standards in the same way that there is with telephony. And so the interoperability, Steve, I think will come through some standardization of communication. I think everybody's going to recognize that the benefits of the cars talking to cars made by another company vastly outweigh any competitive disadvantage they might get from having to adhere to standards.
Yeah, but there will be standards like, TCP/IP, computers use to talk to each other. It won't be that specifically for cars, but definitely they have to communicate on the same, protocol regardless. You can't have multiple protocols. That's going to be regulated. Well, just like a lot of other car stuff that we have now, seatbelts are regulated, by standards. And going back, one quick thing is keep in mind that cars right now have a lot of software or firmware in them, and they go through incredible amount of testing before they see the road. All these manufacturers are constantly, checking their vehicles, make sure that they're not going to fail, the computers are going to, work properly. So I imagine that whole same kind of testing and verification process is going to have to be in place for these cars. There's no way that GM is going to put a car out in the road that didn't go through some very specific, testing. And even then, you still can have errors, but it's going to be worse because their liability is going to go through the roof if one of these cars crashes and kills somebody because somebody wrote, a couple of lines of code that were incorrect. So, and I'm sure that
and answer that question. How about Boeing and what they did with the Max of cutting corners that cost how many lives, and they still haven't got them off the ground again.
That was a massive regulatory failure. Regulatory failure.
That's just what Marcelino was saying, that he's sure that these companies are going to go and double check or they aren't going to cut any corners. Don't kid yourself.
They'll try to find corners to cut, and people will still die. There will still be crashes with autonomous vehicles. But I think, even with those glitches, the number of people who will die will be dramatically less than 40,000. Right. So the standard for safety is not all that high. Right. It's got to lead to less than 40,000 deaths and less than 2 million injuries. Right. And if it does that, then we're better off, even if there are still a lot of deaths. Right. Let's not be have the good be the what it was a saying. But just because some people will still die doesn't mean that autonomous vehicles are a bad idea.
James, you have
in my lifetime. I don't think I'll live long enough to go and see this happen. I don't think Steve will either, Mr. Shank.
You never know. So
I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you, Russ, and for the simple reason that, as John pointed out, this is a case where if a lot of people die, the companies lose their market. And yes, Boeing had a major, fuck up with the 7X7 Max software. And there are a lot of reasons why that happened. There's been a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking around that, but it's still the bottom line that air travel, even on a Boeing Max airplane while they were still flying, was still safer than getting in your car, statistically speaking, than getting in your car and driving 500 miles.
That's the problem with corporations. They look at the situation and say, okay, how many deaths can we be able to live with that we can off these?
Do you want them to say zero and not have, because they can't achieve that? John is correct. They're going to try to cut corners. They're going to try to find, and the incentives for doing that are economic. We want them to maximize a profit margin, but doing that also in the long run provides the best quality products and services. Everything that you own and make use of and enjoy, that's a product of modern technological civilization, has those features to it. Now, cars and airplanes have a lot higher danger threshold in terms of if something goes wrong, then yeah, you're much more likely to die there than if something goes wrong with your stereo. But even so, I have no reservations about getting on any airplane that's scheduled to go where I want to go on a particular day today.
The standards that they're kept to and how long it took them to get there.
So we have a question from Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. I have 2 points. And first, I want to say, I know it's easy to be a naysayer, an old curmudgeon, and always say it can't be done. But there are 2 points that I wanted to make. And one of them was, as a consumer, from my point of view, I already have autonomous vehicles. So all I do is call Uber and a car shows up and takes me where I want to go. That's autonomous as far as I'm concerned. So, and I still have the same traffic on the street that your heavenly view makes it all go away. That's one point. Another point is the reason we have rush hour is because there's a jillion damn cars on the street at the same time. We still need to have those cars on the street at the same time. So how do you reconcile that?
All right. So 2 points. How long do you have to wait for your average Uber or Lyft? You've got to wait a while.
But I understand it's pretty quick in a city.
They're also going to be much cheaper. And when you can get the driver out of the car, they're going to be much cheaper.
Yeah.
Right?
And you don't have all these cars circling around the block looking for be the first one to arrive at a destination once a call comes in for an Uber.
Right. And with respect to the congestion, right? So many of the vehicles out there on the highway now are big vehicles with one person in them. Right. If with autonomous vehicles and transportation as a service, those vehicles are right sized, you can easily double the number of cars on a highway and not increase congestion.
I see. So our application is going to not only say I want a car to go from here to there, but it better have just room for two or just room for one.
Sure.
For how many people? Optimize
this all works in a metropolitan area where you have a confined amount of people. When you start getting out into the outskirts where you go out in the country and stuff like that, it might be to get that autonomous vehicle to the person to pick them up. That could be a half an hour, an hour's worth of a ride.
I agree.
But keep in mind, we're not talking about changing this overnight. We're talking long term. You start planning for it, and by 20 years from now, you're reducing one and increasing the other. So it's not going to happen overnight that everybody's going to be in an autonomous car either.
Yeah, so maybe that's the last 5 or 10%. The folks who aren't going to be using transportation as a service, but they're going to own their own autonomous vehicle, right? Because it would take 20 minutes for it to come and get me.
I like the term plan. Start planning now. Marcelino, I'm making you the king here. Well, start planning. What's your first move?
Yeah, we're planning. Well, no, like John said, I mean, there are things in play right now to try. If we sit down now and say, well, we're not going to do anything because, we have what we have and we, then yeah, nothing's going to happen. But somebody's got to get the, ball rolling to get some of these technologies. And, we're going to see it happen regardless because there's enough incentive out there to do this. But it's going to end up happening.
Well,
if you want to start planning, you start setting standards.
The standards have to come in right now. Yeah. I think they're working on that.
Discussion has been on two tracks: the technological aspect of can we do it, and then the heavenly view aspect of how wonderful it's going to be. I know we can do it technically. They'll figure out that cars won't run into each other. They'll figure that part out. But I'm not sure that you can actually accomplish the heavenly view that John talks about, because you still need a whole lot of vehicles. And whether there's a driver in them or they're driving themselves, they still have to exist.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're still at this point, the way we see the model is, there have to be. But if we going forward, we start optimizing the use of the road, the use of the cars, and we have cars that are, sized to the task. You don't go and use a chainsaw to cut off a little branch on a tree. It's the same kind of an idea. You're going to get the proper tool for the job. And I think with cars, it's the same thing. Steve, you had a question or raise your hand?
I think we need to also address how this would evolve. Right now, as I see it, the car companies want to sell more cars. And they probably view Uber and the consumer as both equal as good customers, let's say. Could they develop, say, a space in a car for a box, and that box would have lots of wires going into it, and that control, one for the radar, one for the brake, one for the steering, all that kind of stuff, and you have competition for whose box gets in there with the best software. So you don't need to change your car every couple of years. You just get to change your box to a faster box with better software.
You mean a car designed by committee?
No, I'm talking about how you make, if the brains of the car is in this software and the software's got a box to it, let's say, how do you upgrade the hardware without having to upgrade the car? Or will they simply say we need to make cars obsolete every couple of years because we get better boxes?
Well, I think that may be happening too, that cars will be like phones, that every 2 years you end up, well, maybe hopefully longer than that, you may have to change them because technology is going to be changing rapidly. So, I like to keep my cars for 20 years, I may not be able to do that.
John, I think that you need to, your economic model has to also match the perception and the business plans of the different players.
Sure. Well, so I could easily envision a world where, Uber owns your car, right? And you say to Uber, I want this car for a year with the option to renew. And I could easily see these companies saying, okay, there are going to be some people that just want their golf clubs in their car all the time. And so we will service that need. Right. And then they're the ones dealing with any upgrades, and they're going to communicate with you, okay, your car is going to be unavailable. It's going to be in the shop because we're upgrading the hardware. Because the vehicles are all owned by transportation as a service providers does not mean it's exactly like Uber is now. Right. There are 100 different varieties where you still don't own the car.
If also all the cars are owned by Ubers of the world, then they'll call the shots as far as technology goes. And I think we'd be much better off than if the consumers own the cars, because we'll be at the mercy of the manufacturers who want to make upgrades impossible. They say you have to buy a new car. The Ubers would say we want the car to be upgradable, because you're not going to improve the brakes. You're not going to improve the steering. Just going to improve the intelligence of this box in the car.
I think Francesca had a question. Francesca, you had your hand up, and then John.
I asked John a question, and I have to see what his response is.
Okay, you don't have a question, Francesca? No. Okay, John, you're next.
No, John, our speaker. Are there other Johns here?
Oh no, John Foote. I'm sorry.
I asked John
the other
question, and you went on to the next speaker, Marcelino. So I like John to answer my question. How do you see this evolving, and how do you match your model, your economic model, to the realities of how the car manufacturers and the other players are thinking?
Well, so I don't have an answer to you. I mean, that's a much deeper question than somebody like me outside of the industry can answer. But they're gonna the Ubers, Googles, and Lyfts. They're gonna buy their new cars from whatever company works best with them in their order of 10 million cars, and provides the best platform for them to serve their customers and make the most money. That's sort of the level of answer that I can give, I'm afraid.
Okay.
John, go ahead.
So my question's about more the less the business model, so less the economist view, sorry. But you have all these sensors on the car, and you get a little mud on it, or some little bit of gravel gets tossed up and hits one of the sensors. And how do you keep these things robust enough that they actually work all the time?
Well, so in the Uber or Google Lyft version of the world, the car's going to know when one of its sensors has got mud on it, and there's probably going to be some threshold. Oh, we've got 10% of our sensors have mud on it, so the car's not going to work very well. So hightail it back to wherever somebody is going to be standing to wipe the mud off.
I have a question.
So it's a whole service. Talk about employment. There's a whole service industry, all in itself, with new jobs.
Oh, for sure. And imagine it won't happen, and God forbid, but imagine that COVID lingers for years and years, right? You're going to have a ton of people employed cleaning these cars after, every certain number of trips.
Okay, Ron has his hand raised. Go ahead, Ron.
What about the effect? Are the autonomous cars going to need any structure on our freeways and roads, such as a sensor or a beacon that comes out and on either side to keep it centered? Or is there stop signs? You mentioned stop signs, whether you're going to need them or not, because they're all talking to each other.
Yeah, so the cars are being developed so that they can function perfectly well on roads as they exist. And to the extent that we add more technology into the roads, that only means that they're going to work better and more efficiently, more smoothly and seamlessly.
That's as long as they can see the white line. If the white line isn't painted on there, the cameras can't see it to go and determine where they're at. They get confused.
Well, right, but so there could be, you can easily imagine a day where there's no white line, but there are sensors on either side of the highway, and so the car knows exactly where it is on the highway.
Oh yes, but that's just where Ron was saying, are you going to need sensors on the freeways? And you said no, and then.
Well, so right. My answer is that the cars are being developed today in such a way that they don't need they don't need more technology on the road.
I think they should try this in Rome.
James.
They are actually.
Oh, Rome is actually easier. I love driving in Italy because everybody does the predictable, aggressive thing. In the United States, we are so unpredictable.
Go ahead, James, and then Hans has his hand up.
Francesca's had her hand waving for quite a while.
Now you're really waving. Okay, let's go with Francesca.
I wanted to ask about long range trips. Like I'm in Palm Desert right now. So if I wanted to go from Marin to Palm Desert with all my stuff,
yep.
Then this car is going to end up in Palm Desert. And then, what happens then?
Well, if Uber, Google, Lyft are nationwide, car rental companies deal with that problem all the time.
Yeah. They had 7,000 rental cars parked at the Palm Springs airport every single March when everybody left.
Right. But, there will be an interweaving of all of the different geographies. The wannabes, the startups in certain geographies, they won't be able to provide you with that car. They'll provide it to you, but then they'll say, okay, there's going to be a surcharge because that car has to drive back here.
Right. See, there you go. Yeah.
But that might still be cheaper than taking your own vehicle.
But I can bring my stuff. It's my stuff.
Or you can say I'm going to Palm Springs and I want this to be my dedicated car for a week.
Yeah,
and
I think that has to be an option that you can keep your car for a week.
Sure. And what happens to this car when I'm not using it? I don't care, so long as whenever I want it, it's got my stuff and it's right there to pick me up.
I think
you'll be paying the per hour charge or whatever they rated at. I think James, you still have a question or?
I forgot what I was going to say. No, actually, with regard to John Foot's question, I think again, every one of these technology questions, I keep immediately jumping in my thoughts to the airline industry. Airplanes are incredibly complex devices these days. They're all computer controlled, all have the capability. I don't think they actually use them, but in principle, they could all take off, fly and land without the pilot ever touching a control stick. But sensors do fail, actuators do fail. The airlines are, by and large, because they have to be, they're very good about doing maintenance and keeping engines, a turbine jet engine spins at 40 or 50,000 RPM, something like that. I don't remember. One of the pilots can remind me, but they're very fast. And if a fan blade comes off an engine, that's a really, really bad day at the office. So, and it does not that it never happens, but it's extraordinarily rare. So the technology part of this yeah, there are going to be development issues early on, but by the time we get to the knee of that curve that Jon Haveman was pointing out, wherever it happens, whether it's 2025 or 2030, it doesn't matter. Wherever that knee is, at that point, the technology itself is already going to be evolving to a point where the reliability, the reason that you're going to hit that knee is because the technology will have already evolved to a point where the reliability is high enough that people will be confident in being able to get in a car and drive exactly the same way today you're confident about getting on a jet airliner and getting to your destination safely.
I think what it end up being before you get to where you're talking about, John, is that you're going to have individual ownership of a vehicle like Tesla's proposed, of being able to go and handle, you want to go to point A to point B, you punch it into the computer and it drives you there, and you're just sitting there in case something happens, but it's doing all the driving. I think that's going to be the step that's going to come first, and that has to be designed and working well. And then the next step would be to go in what you're talking about this evening. But I don't think you're going to go from where we are now to what you're talking about this evening without that middle step.
That's possible, Russ. That's possible. I don't necessarily agree that that's necessary, but it may well be.
It might be the only way. Okay, we have a question from Hans. Go ahead.
Yeah, to come back to the driving under adverse conditions. I mean, I have a hard time to drive in a slushy road or snow-covered road, or especially at night when you can't see the traffic lanes, or in the fog. How can an autonomous vehicle see if I can see?
Right. So in the fog, I actually have a nephew who's working on that problem, working on lasers that can see through the fog. I don't have a good answer to that, other than the fact that there are hundreds of billions of dollars that are betting on their being able to deal with those problems. And as an economist, I'm afraid that's the best answer that I can give.
Well, let's face it, Tesla is going to put out, supposedly if they accomplish it, having long haul trucks driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles without a driver.
Right. And that's a much easier problem than cars driving around in an urban environment. And that will be the first instance of autonomy in our economy. Right, trucks are going to be the first things to go because there's direct economic benefit to every trucking company. If they can get that driver out of there, they'd be really excited about that.
Convoy.
Yeah, convoys. The regulations on driver hours, throw those out the window. Your truck can just drive straight from LA to New York if you want it to.
All right. Carol, did you have a question? I think you were, no? Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? All right. Do we call it a night? All right. I'm seeing some bobbing heads. Well, John, thank you again. That was excellent. Enjoyed every minute of it. So we'll look to having you back again soon.
Well, thanks very much. It was a pleasure being here. Love the follow-up Q&A, and I'd be delighted to come back anytime you like. In the meantime, I am an executive director of a nonprofit, so I'm legally obligated to mention that donations are welcome. There's no such thing as a donation too big or too small.
All right. Well, thank you. And actually, James raised his hand again.
I just wanted to ask John, could you put your slide back up with your contact information? Or you said you're going to give the slideshow to Russ, right?
Yep, I'll send all that information to Ron or whoever I should
that'll
send
be
it
great.
to. Yeah,
Okay.
and hopefully he'll circulate it to everybody else.
Okay, well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I appreciated it.
You bet. Thanks very much, James. Appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Be well,
All right.
everybody.
Good night. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, John.